Hello and welcome back to the channel. So maybe some of you have noticed recently that politics has been quite a prescient subject on my channel. There's been a lot of overtly political content, right? I mean, normally I'd like to post more sort of like niche, maybe kind of perhaps esoteric cultural content, but I just feel like, especially quite recently, like politics has been unavoidable, really. I mean, in regards to our sort of online spheres, there's just been a lot of noise about Restore, and I don't feel like this is completely exaggerated, right? I mean, they've made quite a splash online. I mean, they've garnered like a lot of hype, and it's difficult not to get at least a bit caught up in that momentum. I mean, particularly when you think, well, I mean, they're in a sense a fairly unprecedented kind of unique entity. I mean, they're a byproduct of reform, who themselves are an unprecedented electoral juggernaut poised to destroy the Conservative Party. They've positioned themselves as a hardline anti-immigration party, at least in terms of illegal immigration, with the popular slogan, "Millions must go." But very recently, there's been some problems arise regarding the leader, Rupert Lowe, and his true political persuasion slash orientation, right? And just how hardline a politician he claims to be, or at least how he's perceived. Because I think a lot of people, particularly in our spheres, he's like implicitly at least a gateway between the hard right, but ultimately liberal party of reform, and to a more kind of vigorous nationalist position. Like maybe not far right, but not far off that. I mean, there's a sort of like a nod and a wink to ethno-nationalism, or at least implied, right? His focus on illegal immigration, particularly, like it offers like an almost like Trojan horse, like political vehicle into mainstream politics. And then once in, potentially some of the innards and like the legal viscera of the British establishment could then be quietly deposed or destroyed, off like in our favour potentially, right? But recently he's made some concerning remarks about ethno-nationalism, and that he apparently despises it. So I think some of his more like, admittedly more hardline online supporters have kind of somewhat balked and reacted with like raised eyebrows to this. Basically, like, what does he mean? So he's basically just kind of like another Farage. He's just a kind of Thatcherite boomer liberal. And there's been an interesting mixed response to it. Like one of those from Sargon of Akkad, who I'm sure most of you will be familiar with. I've talked about him on the channel before. And he's recently made a video called Nationalism Without Nationalists, in which he elaborates at length his understanding of the British public zeitgeist in regards to the milieu of modern politics. And this is a phrase itself borrowed from the late Jonathan Bowden in his musings about the lack of success politically of the far right. And essentially, Sargon espouses the opinion that ordinary people, or normies, so to speak, don't want to vote for any kind of nastiness, or anything that has a certain kind of stigma or stain attached to it, right, in the eyes of the public. And nationalism has always fallen under this unfortunate category of perception, so to speak, and yet simultaneously the very same people that they would never vote for a kind of far right political party. Those people are generally very ironically anti-immigration in their sentiments, in their opinions. Like they do think there should be kind of hard restrictions regarding net migration, and that there are a lot of people here that currently shouldn't be, and they think that foreign criminals by the millions should effectively be deported. They'll quietly think that. So they're basically, like in many respects, of a hard right persuasion, but without the kind of assertions to it. So it's like the public like to bark, but they don't want to do the biting, right? Like it's like a bunch of like squeaking chihuahuas, right? They're just what most people are, honestly, at this point. So essentially, the average person is a flaming spineless hypocrite, unfortunately. Like, they're just weak, and we all know this online, right? And Sargon goes on further to sort of qualify this, essentially saying that people don't want ideologues and demagogues in control of the state. And he uses this idea of the cutting edge of ideology, wherein abstract principles formed by syllogisms are effectively kind of dogmatically imposed on the public with harsh consequences for those falling outside of the set boundaries imposed by said ideology, right? And he kind of goes on to further qualify this with saying that individuals have their own kind of relationships, their own particularities, nuances, exceptions, and that if a new law is imposed top down by an ideological state, it doesn't account for exceptions and people who may well be integrated into a given community, and so therefore it wouldn't be pleasant seeing people outside of these boundaries fall victim to what could be seen as a kind of draconian, brutish state. And funnily enough, Sargon goes on to use Andy Burnham as an example of someone that doesn't fall easily under an ideological rubric. Like, he's somewhat like, well, what, a man of the people, I suppose, like alleged king of the north. I mean, he's supposedly well liked in Manchester, although having myself lived in Manchester and visits fairly regularly, can confirm it's just rapidly downhill over the years. Like, go to Piccadilly Gardens and enjoy the sight of migrant crackheads and just preying on young white women and just drunk retards just swilling about without a care in the world. Like, I mean, that's Manchester, and that's all under the sage gaze of the King of the North, the Burnhameister. So, no, he's not a man of the people. He's just a semi-savvy political operator, like an Iranian negotiator, effectively. It's about compromising, negotiating. There's no grand principle to his shenanigans, like a worm or a weasel just like writhing through the corridors of power. So if you think that's better than, idiotic ideologue Starmer, well, I mean, you're entitled to think that, but I mean, I'm not so sure. I think again on that, just because, I mean, do we really think he's going to compromise for people on the online right, like us lot, just us, us anonymous chuds? I mean, I just think instead of stabbing us in the front like Starmer did, he just stabs us in the back instead. So I guess this new kind of assault, what is it, somewhat like novel from Labour at least? Kind of people on the right who are basically just brutalised by the regime, just like every which way, deplatformed, all the rest of it. I guess it kind of feels almost refreshing to be attacked in a novel way. I don't know, but basically, Sargon, he qualifies this kind of middling approach to politics as potentially a strategy for us on the right, and that Restore could learn from this, maybe. But I don't think any of this works, though, at all. Going back to the somewhat admittedly cheeky title of the video, Nationalist Sargonism, it's a wink to the idea of a kind of political horseshoe, but in the opposite way that classical liberals like to qualify it, where traditionally they'd say that the political horseshoe is characterised at the extremes of politics, but I would say that this idea can be applied in the moderate vectors of politics as well, in the sense that whether it's Marxist Sargonism or, as he is now, like nationalist Sargonism, he doesn't get outside of the liberal framing of his argumentation. It always falls back to the same place, wherein he ultimately just ends up playing like the heavily tilted game that his enemies have rigged, like namely liberal democracy. So effectively, if we have a kind of political Burnhamism strategy, for want of a better word, which just sounds stupid even saying it, we can beat the enemy at their own game. I think there's a glaring omission to his thinking, and I think it's something that truly actually characterises us, like what right-wing thought actually is. Which, if you look at this from a kind of truly rightist perspective, and you zoom out, you notice that this kind of political dialectic all of it manufactured and rigged. It's all got a kind of weird, should we say, like ominous downward trajectory to it. Like there's some kind of like dark energy almost pulling it, like all of it down. And that energy seems to be a lot more powerful, I think, than anyone really understands. And that no matter what argument, what dialectic, what rationalism, syllogism, like whatever word game you engage with your rigged opponent, it all pales in comparison to this like this dark gravity that's pulling everything in one direction. And you realize the people that always win, right? Namely the left-wing progressives, the neoliberals, the Marxists, they're not better than you. They're just passively, incidentally, metaphysically falling downwards. Like they have this kind of horrendous gravity, incidentally, on their side. And so me, you know, trying to fight them, you're not really fighting with a human entity. As mad as it sounds, like you're fighting literally something demonic, like with power that you don't and can't have. So no matter how much you muddle along and negotiate and compromise and whatever, like you're still being dragged to hell, like almost like a kind of dialectical prison, right? You seemingly middling, muddling Burnhamite opponent is dragging you down with gravity on their side, right? And I mean, you see where I'm coming from. It's like it's a kind of Spenglerian view, like the decline of the West in a grand sense, so to speak. And I think that kind of perspective is what ultimately defines the online right, the alternative right. It's the true perspective of everything, and the conventional like political weaponry. It's not going to work long term. I mean, maybe we can have incidental sort of miraculous victories with Restore, maybe, but ultimately, it's just a prayer. It's just open a prayer against the vicissitudes of just hellish chaos that inevitably awaits at the bottom, right? I mean, not to exaggerate, but we are being biblically dragged to hell. If you've ever just woke up and just sat down, looked in the mirror, and just wondered to yourself, like, why am I such a twat? Like, why am I such a loser? Why is everything getting worse and worse over the years? Like, I'm impotent. I can't do anything about it politically. The UK just seems to get more and more grim. You need to understand that it's actually even worse than you realise, because it's not that it's not just you, that it's not just even the grand tectonics of money printing, neoliberal economics and globalism that's killing us. I mean, this in truth is biblical. It's eschatological fundamentally, and I think it's this kind of this Spenglerian kind of Platonic worldview, this mysticism, this prophecism, this alchemical understanding of the world is what modern liberals like Sargon, I don't think really, they don't appreciate or understand. I mean, it's not hokum, it's not superstition or nonsense. It's just the truth. Honestly, it's like you can't just quantify or measure it, like an empirical hypothesis. It's ineffable, amorphous, mysterious. God works in mysterious ways, I suppose, but much like culture is, like in the same way you can't define culture or measure it, yet we all collectively and intuitively understand it's still real. It's it's the texture, the fabric of the very fabric of our entire reality, and it can't be rationalized. And middling your way into politics does not count as a grand strategy, like to beat or reverse the apocalypse. So, are we going to muddle and just kerfuffle our way out of the abyss, out of oblivion? Like, no, silly. No, of course not, right? Now, with all that revelation being said, I'm cool with Restore, right? They're likable, well-meaning, for the most part, I think. But it's like they're bringing us a weapon, like a wooden spoon, to an end-level dragon Hydra boss, like, metaphysically speaking. I mean, I'm all for it, hold my beer and all that. I'm rooting for them, but the odds in the grand picture of things are well stacked against them, like well stacked. And like Lowe doing a boomerism, right, turning against ethno-nationalists or whatever. Like, I suppose they're supposed to, they're just like the boogeyman, like, I guess. Like, I don't know. But he doesn't seem to grasp even the slightest of gravity, like, really, like, the bigger context of the picture. I mean, he can't, because sometimes, like, some normies, some boomers do actually get a glimpse, like, into the abyss, so to speak. It does happen sometimes, and most of the time, they just go off the deep end anyway, right? They don't come back from that. And honestly, I think these kind of boomerisms, people like Lowe make, these normieisms, let's just call them, are kind of like, they're almost like an unconscious defense against what is like the brutal truth. I mean, yes, he understands the grooming gangs and, just the unadulterated depravity, of the whole mess, but I honestly don't think he actually understands. He actually sees the things for what it is, which is not just illegal migrancy being a major issue, I mean, which it obviously is, but that multiculturalism itself is a cancer. It's not even that. It's actually it's necrosis. It's a kind of necrosis of not just the flesh, the race, the Anglos, rather the ethnos, the peoples of Europe, but it's the corrosion, the corruption, the rotting of our soul. Really, that's what it is. If you actually understood this, you wouldn't reflexively fucking boomerize your fellow travellers, into oblivion in this damn mess. You wouldn't forsake them. At the very least, you wouldn't be looking for a political solution anyway, right? Because ultimately the answer really is it's outside of politics, fortunately for us. So, to put it bluntly, Sargon, Rupert, Lowe, disaffected liberals, the new alt-lite, should we call them, online chatterati, their plan to fix everything and restore the UK is, in a very real sense, I mean, it's like, it honestly is drinking the very poison that is in fact just killing us anyway, right? I mean, they want to play the game, they want to play politics, but again, politics itself is a manifestation of profound civilizational sickness and spiritual decay in the millennial grand scheme of things. Like your holy grail, politics, it is in truth just a poison chalice. It might be less poisonous, than the ones being spoon-fed to us by, Labour and, the Conservatives and Boris Wave and all the rest of it. But it is fundamentally still poison nonetheless. Whether your strategy is one of a middling compromise or, spewing demagogue, ultimately you're both kind of trapped within a metaphysical prison, a prison of rationalism. This dialectic that you think you're having someone, it's just chains. Ultimately, it's kind of keeping you in a kind of Hobbesian construct that's hurtling to the abyssal plains. So, and that's not where we want to be. It's not where I want to be. And not sound cliche, but we're really going to have to look outside of the box in the long term, right? Or we all just go splat as our tumbling elevator of modernity just eventually hits Tartarus, right? At the end of the day, we're all just unwitting Dantes here, right? But without any of the grandeur and, minus the poetry, I suppose. So essentially, we're all just shit Dantes on a journey to Hades. And whether we like it or not, and, guess what? Not all of us are going to make it, right? Unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of interesting and alternative, outside of the box thinking that's going to get us out of this hot mess, if it does at all, right? And nothing less than absolute civilizational collapse is what we're trying to escape. It's not just a political battle, right? It's not just, well, we can, deport, some migrants because technically they're illegal. Like, no. Like, it's a grand quest that we get to partake in here, right? And I can only hope that Sargon, I think he's a good-natured person, very smart and all the rest of it. So is Rupert Lowe. I hope they eventually start to look a bit outside of the box and realise that, pissing middling, and left-wing demos-based NIMBY civic nationalism might not quite cut the mustard in the long run. And the UK does have some very strong mustard to cut. So with that, Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.